Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite podcast that we did remember to record this week. I am Shawn Merwin here with Duke University alum Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos, I never realized that you went to Duke. Thank you for reminding me.
I only own a few shirts that are not Duke shirts, but yeah, I try to change it up.
I graduated from Ghostfire University, apparently.
I've
So,
heard great things about its horror diploma.
yes.
Yeah. I'm about to go to school because I'm gonna travel to Italy tomorrow, and when I go see my parents and we look at all the architecture and everything in Tuscany, I'm always like super inspired. So it's like going to school for my
Nice.
brain. So I'm looking forward to that.
Bring your notebook for all the ideas, the adventure ideas and encounter
Yeah.
ideas that you definitely.
I absolutely do. It's been very inspiring on different projects. So the only thing is I don't actually have a current project really right now. So I'll just have to create a new one.
Okay. We can hook you up with some work, Teos. I got you covered if you really need it.
Thank you.
But the project we're working on right now is called Mastering Dungeons, which, believe it or not, has listeners. And sometimes those listeners reach out to us with questions or comments, and we're going to cover a few of those today, starting with Daniel via Twitter, who asks, how do you stay inspired week to week in the middle of a campaign? Pre-campaign inspiration is always plentiful. I know the advice is usually watch a movie or read a book, but I read 50 books, but I read 50 books last year, and I'm 5 sessions into a fresh campaign, and I am running thin. And so the too long didn't read answer to this is, well, what does inspire you? And just do more of that.
Mm.
Now that begs the question, what is inspiring? What inspires you as opposed to other people? What inspires your players? So the longer answer is everyone runs campaigns for different reasons, and players and DMs want different things. So if we take the old cliche, find your joy, let's just beat that dead horse and just keep returning to the joy. You found it once, that's where it lies. So hopefully you can get back to it. And if you lose that joy, ask yourself, how do I get that back? And was that really the joy I was looking for?
Well, yeah,
What do
that's
you think,
good.
Teos?
Oh, that's great. I had not thought I kind of going like, why did I love that other part? What has changed? That's good. Well, I was thinking about this from the other angle, and I was reading a blog post by Richard Green today where he's talking about running the Tomb of Annihilation campaign. And I was thinking to myself, like, man, that campaign was just like everything I want. Like, it's just, I'm such an Indiana Jones type fan. I love that sort of jungle stuff. Like, growing up in Colombia made it like more fun for me. All the tropes were even more fun because I could walk out to jungles. But it's just like it's perfect. I love that kind of everything about it. And so I had zero trouble staying motivated in that campaign because it was everything like I want in a campaign. And I could just change what I'm doing, what the party's doing, particularly from session to session, and roll with it. But I just love the premise. And so one of the things I wonder is when we lose inspiration, for me, it's generally been two kind of things. One is that in the first place, it was only but so engrossing. And now that we've repeated upon it, it's run out. Like if I'm running, I'm not really a horror person. So if I run horror over and over again, I'll get tired of it. Horror for a few sessions, great. For a long campaign, it's probably just going to run its course, and it's time to do a new campaign. Nothing's going to really probably save it, probably. The second thing that'll happen is when I don't have a good concept of where the story should go. It can be sandboxy, but I need to know like there are going to be these phases or whatever. And there was a time I was running a campaign and I hadn't really come up with the end, nor put in plans for how the PCs could develop an end. And we were just sort of doing stuff and I kept adding. And that got old because I just wasn't coming up with something that felt great. And so then it petered out as well for those reasons. And so it's worth, I think you're on the right track of like diagnose why this energy is going. Because if you're doing something that's interesting to you, you really kind of shouldn't feel that way. At least I don't.
And it's funny because my answer for personally is the opposite of yours. Mine is I'm generally running something that I've purchased or that I've written and I'm play testing or going through. And so I know the ending. And what leads me to become uninspired is I'm trying to move toward this ending. And even if it's very well written and makes good sense, sometimes the story that's unfolding with your players is not the story that the adventure or the
Mhm.
campaign has in mind. And so it's a constant struggle
Mm,
to go from the story that wants to be told by
yeah,
the game itself to the story that's planned to be told by the adventure.
yeah.
And I become uninspired when I just run out of energy to keep pushing it in the direction that
Hmm.
it should go as opposed to where it wants to go. And what it inspires me then is to say, fine, I'm going to put this book away. We're done with this book. We're going to tell this story now.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get back to the book, but for now, I'm writing my own thing. And we're going to move in the direction that this story and the players want to go.
I recall a guy named Kenneth Sheffield. I was running a third edition Living Greyhawk organized play adventure. It's supposed to be a 4 hour adventure. We're an hour in and we have not left the like intro spot.
Mhm.
We haven't even
Mhm.
touched the thing we're supposed to touch. And at some point I get a little exasperated. I'm like, and he sees that I'm about to say, like, look, get on with it. And he's like, oh, like whatever you've got in those little pages is any better than what we're doing right now. And I'm like, okay. And I just
Yeah.
shut up and we just did whatever, improv theater, went off and did what they did. And I took chunks of the module and just chucked them in. At the end, they were like, see, that was fine. I'm like, yes, it was fine. It wasn't this adventure, but it was. We had a good
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was it
I
was
mean,
fine.
the other thing, last thing I'd add here is that sometimes it's about the players and their characters and the way they're interacting, which you kind of spoke to a little bit, but sometimes that overlay of characters, players, and the materials, whether it's story or you or your style, whatever, but it's just not quite great. It's like a TV show that, you like some aspects of it, but you don't like the rest of it. And eventually you kind of don't want to watch it anymore. And that
Yeah.
can happen, and that's okay to recognize it. And I think that a big question is, does everybody else feel that way? Like everybody's loving your campaign and you're not? Okay. Then maybe you want to work with it or something. But like if everybody's just sort of so so, maybe
Mhm.
they need to step into a portal and suddenly they're in the world of Star Wars or whatever will excite you, change it up drastically and
Yeah.
just, draw inspiration from it being different, not the same thing that maybe it's just not working.
Mhm. There you go. Next, we have a question from Ken Droid the Unique via YouTube. Here's a question. How does one get, create, and build player investment in a game when they don't feel like they're invested in their own character? And
Mm.
this is a little bit like the last question. Uh, the first question I would ask is, does the player want to be invested in their character, or do they just want to be invested in the game? And I don't mean just as a diminutive. I mean just as opposed to being really invested in their character, they want to play a game. And it could be with any character. They want to interact with the rules. So player investment comes in many flavors. And sometimes you might want a player to be invested in their character and in the story and how their character and the character's background and traits and flaws and bonds and ideals interact with the story. But it doesn't have to be that to make a player have fun. So you just have to gauge where on that scale of investment a player is.
Yeah.
And if they're not invested in their character, that's okay. Find out what does interest them and push them in that direction.
Yeah, 100%. That question one is, are they even the kind of person to become invested in a character? Because maybe this is as far as it goes. I mean, we've talked about with Daggerheart, right? There's this idea that you're going to come up with each player is going to come up with these great character hooks. And maybe the player's like, I don't know, man, I'm just a sword for hire and I don't have any history. I just want to play and roll dice. Then that's what you're going to get, right? There's no drawn blood from that stone, or at least not much. You can pose questions to them and give them build the story now, right?
Mhm.
But you're not going to do that investment off of anything that came from their past or those kind of things that usually really help along these lines. It'll all be in the now and asking them to make choices. If they do want to be invested and this character is just not working for them, it's time for that character to exit, right? And we've had that happen where like there was a character that I thought had like a really neat idea around their character. I really liked the character, and they were like, "I'm tired of playing this character." And I think a lot of it was sort of the way the build worked and stuff as he leveled up, right? So it's sort of a somewhat mechanical choice. But all right, we just sent that character off into the sunset. And I felt bad because I had all these things to reveal about, questions the character had asked, but that they were not invested, and so that character left, and a new one came in, and so it goes.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that in a
No.
campaign, right? Having a character, for whatever reason, leave and a new character come in, whether it's the same player or a different player, because you as the game master get to steer the story, not control it, not right, not dictate over it, but hopefully get to steer it. And you can bring any sort of interest for the player via their character into the game.
Yeah.
There have been more than one time where a really interesting NPC caught someone's attention. They're like, "That's the character I want to play." And I'm like,
Mm,
"Okay, we might have to tweak the adventure a bit, but now you are playing the town guard who slayed a dragon as a child, and now uh,
yeah.
is the captain of the guard." Well, they got fired as captain of the guard, and now they're the PC, and off they go.
That's something I always keep in mind when characters, you see that like look in a player's eye of like, oh, that's a cool character. You make a note of that, because if you kill off their character, then you're like, how about you play that one?
Mhm.
But yeah, also if they just
For
find they're
sure.
not liking their character, then you kind of seem to like that. Yeah, captain of the guard. We want to play her, and yeah, off we go.
Last question, Kurt Ugle via YouTube. Do you see potential in Daggerheart's quote blank canvas style of campaign creation? Have you played The Quiet Year by Buried Without Ceremony? Daggerheart's recommendations feel in line with the spirit of that game. The blank canvas may work, but would work best within a clearly defined scope. With the setting and intent undefined, half of my players freeze up with analysis paralysis, and the other half would go gonzo with conflicting styles or overboard with details. It may seem like a small difference, but it is huge. And this is absolutely true here. What Kurt Ugle is talking about is essentially a prompted creation system in a game versus a promptless one, or at least a structured prompt system versus an unstructured one. So there are games out there where creating this canvas, let's say, is the point of the game. You create it, you mess around with it, and then you walk away and you admire this thing
Mhm.
that you've created with the other players. So, as I understand the Quiet Year, that's what that is. You have a system using cards where things happen to this society after an apocalypse, and you just play for a year to see what happens based on these prompts. And when you're done, you've told a story of the settlement. That canvas creation is the game, and then you walk away. Microscope is the same thing. You build this world, and then you leave it where it is. So there are many games that start with this canvas creation, and a lot of them, as I said last week, end up dying after the that part of the game because the creation of the canvas is more fun than the game.
Yeah.
And so what we discussed with Daggerheart was this sort of creation, does it fit for the style of the game and just for a game itself that they're trying to do?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a difference between the creating the world together, and it's now like a canvas, and you can all sit back and stare and go, wow, that's a gorgeous world. We created a lovely world. What do we do with it, right? And then what you're trying to actually do in games like Daggerheart and in other systems is you want to have this not be a canvas, but a feeling like you're jumping headlong into this thing, right? And you're seeing these glimpses of what the world is, but you're in the thick of it, and it is moving and happening, and you're moving and happening. And that's supposed to be the interesting bit, right? It's the difference between like third edition and second, especially second edition source books. You know, it'd be like the Cult of the Dragon. You're like, ooh, and it's like, 400 years ago, and you're like, okay. And then you're like, well, what do I do with this? And you're like, I mean, all I have is some random rumors. So I guess I'm just sort of making my own thing. And I've got to remember all of this lore. And I don't, none of it's really actionable. And I wrote a blog post on that. Like, you want your lore to be actionable. Well, you want your campaign building to be actionable. So it should all be focused on the relevance to the now and the relevance to the play that you're about to start. So it's always moving around that, right? If you're doing a world in Eberron and you're building this like house that has these dire machinations in place, and there's this vulnerable place, well, those are two conflicts that are going to start mashing together. And maybe you've got a holiday coming up and an airship race, and you start putting all this into place so that the parts are moving and unfolding. I was just watching on Apple Plus the show Slow Horses, and you can just see how they start giving you a little bit of a story bit, and that's going to come into play later, and then there's another bit over here, and they all kind of start curling inwards, right? And that. And that's the fun of it. You want that campaign world to be coming in on itself in the way that makes you go, oh, this is going to all, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to do things. And that's the point of this experience, right? So Daggerheart isn't just, like, it would let me down if what I do with it is say, okay, we put a name on a map, you're trudging through it, and because you did this, then we'll go left. I mean, there's no point to that. That's lamer than a prescribed adventure, right? The point of it is to have these parts that are going to come and create conflict and mash together, the way that you maybe is even simpler to conceive of in other role-playing games, I think.
Yeah. One, I've loved Slow Horses. Two, I'm reading the novels right now.
I bet that's great.
And three, going back to Kurt's question, it's, half my players are going to freeze up with analysis paralysis. The other half are going to go overboard. And that shows the issue with this sort of world building before you start is exactly this, because different players want different things, both in that world building thing and then once the game starts. I can sit down with a group of players who want nothing to do with world building, right? They want the world presented to them. And if it's something that their character would know, they just want me to say, and your character knows blank. Right. Because they want to react to this spontaneously. Yeah. They don't want to be building the story beforehand. They want to react to the story. And there's nothing wrong with that. Then there are players who are motivated, going back to the first question, right, or second question. There are players who are motivated to help build the story by laying the groundwork, laying the seeds themselves for what their characters will be interacting with.
Yeah.
But that takes a level of interest and dedication and storytelling knowledge that I would venture a guess that not a lot of players of role-playing games have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like if you go to a convention, and it's not you have to go to D&D convention, go to any convention, right? Go play Cypher System games or Fate or anything. The number of players that really walk into a random table ready for that kind of play is a little low. And so you have to assess your group and see whether that works. But that's where I think games like, sometimes games with very simple mechanics, we keep going back to them for a reason. And Fate doesn't get played as much as everybody would probably like for reasons, but its concepts of aspects and assigning that to both players and the world and villains and everything really does work really well. And it's because they're very clear, easily graspable. We don't get lost in details. We just say, hey, it's a city of trade. Boom, right? And that is, and it doesn't matter whether you love role-playing, deep immersion, you're into character builds, you get it. This is a merchant city, right? And by just sticking to really big things, right? There's gang warfare everywhere. Okay, like that just colors everything. And you can riff off of it, or you can run a published thing or whatever you want to do. But that concept is really clear and keeps going across. And that's also why I like 13th Age's one unique thing, because it's the simplest way to just say, like, come up with one little tiny phrase that you're going to play off of session after session, right? And we will all get it. We'll all understand your character. And then you have systems like 5e that tries to give you like 7 things about your character. Your background and your goals and your ideals and your bonds and your 2 personality traits and da-da-da. Nobody can remember any of them, right? So sometimes for trying to do all of this world building, we can actually get lost in it and lose the threads of it. And that's a big important part of this, is assessing that, right? Are we in that danger? If we've followed what we think is Daggerheart's rules for building the world, and for how we're playing off scenes, and it's not working, then you want to pull back and go like, where are we straying? And maybe we need to really simplify and like, what are the big themes here that we're all going off of, right?
Yeah. And like Fate, I wonder if players are ready for Daggerheart, right? And what it wants to. They're ready for the rules, I think. But are they ready for that deeper indie feeling? Right? Critical Role works for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
One of the reasons it works is because Matt is Matt.
And the players.
One of the reasons it works is because the players are invested. And at this point, they're invested not just socially, not just narratively, financially, right? This is their life. This is their livelihood. And if it's your livelihood to connect your character to each other, connect your character to the world, then you will do that. But if you're meeting once every 2 weeks for 3 hours on a Friday night after work with 3 beers in you, and you're expecting people to get to this level of intricate, complex, convoluted, interweaved storytelling, it's not going to happen.
I do want to go a step back and say, like, obviously, folks are playing Powered by the Apocalypse. Are they playing so in enormous numbers? Not enormous, but clearly these kinds of games have an audience. I think I would take what you'd say and correct me if I'm wrong. I would say, is Daggerheart a sort of smart business play in terms of going after an audience when it seems to be pleasing a rather small wedge of all the market out there? Is that kind of what you're saying? Or?
Well, I'm just saying, I'm looking at it not as a business venture, but just as a role-playing game, as something that will be one of many choices you have as a player. And I would love to sit down and run a full campaign of Fate. I would love to sit down and run a full campaign of Daggerheart, where the players are just as invested in the creation of the story as I am. I would say that my pool of players is already limited, and if I want that type of group, my choice for a player group would be even more severely limited, to the point where I might not be able to find them.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think that's similar. If I wanted to run Powered by the Apocalypse, I would have to really, for a long campaign, any of my players would play it for a short experience, but for a long one, maybe. But maybe if I led up to it, play some Blade Runner, play some, this, that, and the other, work towards it, maybe. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. We don't want to go down the Daggerheart rabbit hole, but this is a fun question. Absolutely.
Yep. And we'll, of course, discuss Daggerheart for the final time in our main segment today. So thank you to our listeners for bringing those questions to us. Now let's get to our news and commentary section, starting with our first look at the 2024 Player's Handbook. We record on Monday, starting on Tuesday and for the rest of the week. So this will have already happened to some extent. The Wizards of the Coast team is going to be revealing details about the 2024 Player's Handbook starting on Tuesday, where at 7 a.m. Pacific, They are going to give us Player's Handbook, everything you need to know, a weapon mastery discussion, and a character origins discussion. And then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, respectively, they're going to delve into the fighter, the paladin, and the barbarian. And you can watch this on youtube.com/D&D Wizards.
Yeah, and on Ian World, Latia posted for Wizards, which was kind of like the first. We were all kind of remarking, "Wow, this is like the first time Wizards has posted on Ian World in a long time." Saying this video is a big boy, and it's the first of quite a few to come. I'll say that this is just the first week. We're definitely not gonna only talk about only 3 classes, and I thought that was interesting because it's June. We're still a ways out, and to kind of give these level of glimpses, it's interesting timing, right? And so I think a lot of us were thinking, gee, what's Wizards doing? It's like they're not drumming up any interest, and it looks like their plan has been 3 weeks in a row of cover reveals, and now these video series showing glimpses of the book, which is interesting. I mean, it's very focused on the hobby, right? It's focused on the hobby space and existing players as much as anything, because I don't think a video walkthrough of the barbarian is how you draw in a new player. It's how you try to talk the current barbarian player into sticking with this or trying this version. So it'll be interesting. I mean, it'll definitely center a lot of talk on the brand within our space. I just would love to have seen some things that go outside of our space, but I think it's maybe a smart strategy for inside the space.
Speaking of strategies, Hasbro CEO Chris Cox did an interview with Fortune magazine talking about many things, Hasbro, but included D&D, E1, and the sort of hobby in general. And so now we're going to play another game of Teos is CEO of Hasbro. I will read the question and Chris Cox's answer, and then Teos will give the correct answer. So Chris Cox said, after being prompted by a question, that one of the problems with Hasbro is that they had strayed from their core business, not paying enough attention to it, and failing to upgrade their internal talent or invest in their supply chain or innovation. He says that they got away from remembering that games and toys are actually about the playing. What do you have to say, Teos?
Let me put on my CEO hat. I'm not trying to be Chris Cox specifically. I know Chris isn't going to watch this, but if he did, I wouldn't want to think that I'm mocking him. I'm just putting on a generic CEO hat. Oh yeah, selling E1. We strayed from our core business. Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing more important to enormous businesses than the people that work here and how efficiently we work. So definitely don't ask me about our push for video games, which have the similar risk and cost rate to movies and E1, or how we have spent $2 billion on video games so far and continue to invest tons on video games, despite closing already several game studios and partnerships. I mean, and definitely don't talk about how the fact that we've had 3 D&D game releases, 2 of them enormous failures, and one of them that was Baldur's Gate 3, which is the only thing we'd like to talk about right now.
Yeah. And I'm going to step in and say it was interesting that he said that they got away from their core business, and it's really what they should be about is the playing of these games and playing with these toys. And I'm like, that's does anyone play with toys anymore? Does anyone play games like they did? I mean, when I was a kid, we had to play with these because there was no internet, and there basically wasn't even television when I was really young. There was, but not cable and everything. So like I played with GI Joes, and I played with Mr. Potato Heads with actual potatoes. We put the eyes and the ears and the hats on real potatoes. We played Monopoly on a board. We played Battleship on the boards. Do kids still do that? I don't even think they do. So it's funny to hear him say focus on play when I don't think there is a focus on play unless you're talking about video games or digital games or those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you fully. It's I mean, and well, this next question actually kind of ties
Yep.
into that, right?
Yep. So uh, after being prompted with a question, Chris Cox said that pre-pandemic, the toy industry was growing at 2% per year. And then during the pandemic, it was growing at 40% per year. And now it is returning to what has been the baseline. And that question for me, that doesn't even sound right. I don't even think the toy industry grew at 40% during the, I think games did. I don't
Yeah,
think toys did. And
yeah, I don't think
anyway,
so either.
so
Um,
what do you have to say about that?
I mean, 2% growth. I would like to get out of this room immediately because there is no way that any of my investors are going to be cool with 2% growth. 2% growth that we're returning to. Boy, if that's really what we think we're returning to, we're doomed. My job is over, and I better start looking on LinkedIn and talking to my buddies at the next barbecue.
There you go. There was a question about how to revitalize a decades old D&D game. And Chris said Dungeons and Dragons was big for Gen X and now it's big for Gen Z. Gen X played it with their kids to a certain degree. A couple of things went into bringing it back. It's still kind of crunchy and it is for nerds like me, but it's a lot more accessible than it was. We made it more flexible with rules and paired it with streaming, and that really helped popularize the game. 40% of our player base is women. Okay, CEO Teos.
Okay. And look, let me step out of character so I can say this is a fine answer as a counter, but I mean, all right, so you interviewer asked me about how to revitalize the decades old D&D. It is revitalized. You apparently haven't done your legwork because this is a D&D edition that has outsold all previous editions. So whatever your idea is of D&D being big, it's bigger right now. This is the biggest it's ever been. Bigger in sales, bigger in excitement, bigger in number of players. It's even launching, by the way, maybe I should mention this, a new version of 5th edition this year. Like and
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. We have diversified the game has been one of the keys to the success. 40% of our player base is women. Excellent point I should make. But this whole it's crunchy and it's for nerds. No, the idea of D&D is we have found that it has massive appeal. One of the things the pandemic showed was a huge desire to connect with people in kind of traditional but also new ways. And D&D has always been that. It's always been a type of play that is on one hand talking and being and rolling dice. It's very classic in that sense, but very new to everybody who plays it, right? A way of communicating and establishing relationships that is still very innovative. And so we're constantly revitalizing Dungeons and Dragons, and the player base absolutely reacts to that.
Question. Last year's D&D movie did okay, but not great at the box office. Did that give you pause about tying products to movies? Chris's answer. The movie taught us that we can create better adjacencies for Dungeons and Dragons. It has a bright future. While movies are an option, I'd be more of a fan of more game streaming.
Game streaming?
CEO Teos.
So first of all, game streaming, does he mean like actual plays?
I don't know.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So how about this? How about CEO face? Well, you say it's not great at the box office. That this movie has been in the top 10 globally most of 2023 and 2024, seen by an incredible number of people. This plus Baldur's Gate is phenomenal for us, for Hasbro, for Wizards, for D&D. The problem actually isn't D&D, but the movie industry. The D&D movie has done better on global streaming than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. At the box office, it was comparable to the similar timed, tried and true franchises like Mission Impossible and John Wick. I mean, come on. The movie was awesome. Yes, the movie industry is challenging, but D&D is a success, and we have work to make a future entertainment. We have work to make a future entertainment within those parameters of that challenging industry, right? Even Chris Pine wants a sequel. I would like a sequel, but it is risky, and it's no less risky than video games.
True. All right, let's talk about D&D players. Is the stereotype about D&D players being socially awkward true? Um, so I would have reached out through the internet if necessary and strangled the reviewer right there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this is the answer that Chris Cox gave. I don't claim to be the biggest social butterfly in the world, but over the last 8 years, I probably made more new friends playing D&D than I have since college. And that's not supposed to happen in your 40s. It's a great way to connect with people, and it's very social. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd want to say, haha, dude, your question is so out of touch. There was a commercial during the Super Bowl for the D&D movie. The game is played by football players as well as all kinds of directors, actors, singers, you name it. Cool people play D&D. It is a game for everybody because it's a game about connecting with people. First and foremost, it's about people building fun and exciting connections together. It's also about imagination, which apparently you lack. That's why it has such a great appeal for the young, and then that carries forward across older demographics. People of all ages are playing this game of all types. There's no walk of life. You can't look at a lineup and guess who the D&D player is. So, no, I absolutely reject the premise of what you're saying.
There you go. You can answer those questions for yourself and see the article at finance.yahoo.com. Link in our show notes. Teos taking off his CEO hat so we can get on to news about. I don't know if we're breaking this news. I haven't seen it anywhere else. So let's say we are.
Yeah.
Um, the Eye of Vecna, or I'm sorry, Vecna's Eve of Ruin adventure, the digital version on D&D Beyond differs from the version in the published book. Our Discord members, the amazing group that they are, noted that the D&D Beyond version lacks art, or has more art
Yeah.
than the book. You wanna take this over here?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, as far as I know, a breaking news thanks to our Discord. So thank you, folks. So they have provided a list of 12 pieces of art not present in the printed version. And it's in our show notes, but at things like Numi is depicted in chapter 1. There is Makubli Key and Torkner Iron Teeth, and all these other characters appear. A lot of it is NPCs. Then and there's notes that Numi is the only thing that's cut from chapter 1 in the physical book, but almost all named NPC art in chapters 2, 3, and 4 are not in the printed book. And in the Ebron chapter, the only named NPC with art is Glaive, who is an antagonist. The art appears in line with the text on D&D Beyond. So just, if you look at D&D Beyond, everything seems normal, but then you look at your book and you go, wait a minute, that's not there. The only way to realize the difference is you have to really hold up the book, look at the screen, and compare. I actually reached out to Wizards to ask about this and some other juicy things that we've been tracking. And what I asked was, are there any other changes? How would we know when it isn't documented? And does Wizards not feel that this kind of a difference is worth communicating or capturing? To me, it begs the question, what is real, right? What is the baseline? Is the baseline D&D Beyond? Is the baseline the book? And should there be some sort of guidance in between them, right? Should there be some sort of expectation on the customer side that if there is a change in one, it would be in the other, or that there would be at least some notification of it, right? We've seen this problem with Errata where they went and fixed the Hadozi, but they also didn't just change the parts that needed it because of the horribleness that had been done to it, but then they went and made some errata fixes as well. And it initially was not documented at all, right? It took months for it to get into Roll20, for example. So these are important questions, right? Is Roll20 getting this art? I don't know. How would anybody know? Do we have to sit there and pour through our books? So I did ask in as nice a way as possible I could, because I'm not angry. I'm just curious, what is the plan here, especially with errata no longer being documented in the way it once was. So we'll see about this and other issues. What the Wizards team says. They've been kind to reply and say that our questions have been forwarded on to other groups. So we'll see what they say on this and the other questions that you'll have to wait to hear about.
There you go. We will keep our fingers on the pulse of that. The Adventurers League has some breaking news. They are adding Tabletop Scotland as a new premier organizer. Welcome, everyone working with Tabletop Scotland. They are joining Baldman Games, Gamehole Con, and the Greasy Snitches as premier organizers. So who is Tabletop Scotland. We have Dave Wright in a team that hosts in-person and online conventions and charity events since 2018. They're from Edinburgh, and they run most AL events at the larger conventions in the UK. They will be working with UK Games Expo starting in 2025. Their next event is September 6th through 8th, and you can find them at tabletopscotland.co.uk. Who works with Dave? People we know like Ian Hawthorne and Richard Green, among others. And they are going to be creating, premiering, and publishing their epic Polyhedral Adventures. And you can find that at polyhedral.co.uk/adventures. So we're going to keep an eye on what Tabletop Scotland could come up with. Speaking of that, the Greasy Snitches are moving in the same direction that Baldman Games and Gamehole Publishing are by having an exclusive setting for their adventures. Teos, you want to take us through that?
Yeah, sure. So they will have a setting of Everesca and Najara, areas of the Forgotten Realms, beginning July 1st, 2024. So they have that is their exclusive region, the same way that we have these other groups with the other regions we mentioned. Adventures published before July 1st don't need to change the setting, but these new ones will now be in that area, and they'll be exploring and expanding that scene. If you're interested in like, wow, how did these two groups become this premier organization? How do I do that for my group that has been established and running all kinds of games in this particular area of the world? There is a link on D&D Beyond /tag/adventures-league, link in our show notes that you can go to check it out if you think your group could qualify for this and want to apply to be one of these groups. I asked Dave Wright, since he's on our Discord, and Richard Green as well, what kind of the thought was behind here, because I find it interesting. Like, on one hand, I love seeing these groups recognized, right? You've been doing the hard work of running organized play in some area, but at the same time, to be honest, I don't see that the larger player base spanning the continents is saying, you know what I need? I need a new region. And so I was trying to kind of figure out what this is like. And I said, is the idea here really to sort of empower groups to create a neat story kind of in their area? And that I got a kind of affirmative on that. They can't spill all the beans on everything, but it seems to me like that's sort of the purpose of this. And I think that's a pretty neat idea, right? If you're looking at sort of a regional group that could create awesome ideas for all of the UK fans, I'm all for that, right? It seems like a win-win.
Yeah. As much as we have become a global community, there is also something in role-playing games, specifically with the love of sitting down at a table with a game master, to have a regional community. And that's what this is, I think, starting to set up. We'll have a Philippine contingent running stuff there, a Scotland contingent running stuff there. Baldman Games and Gamehole doing their thing in North America, and see if it spreads.
Yeah, great.
And last but not least, we have some announcements for the Origins Awards. This is an annual award show hosted by Origins across many categories, including board games, puzzles, etc. Winners are announced at Origins, which runs this week. Some of the nominations were for Best Miniatures Game, Dungeons & Dragons Onslaught. For Best Adventure, we have two Free League games, a Vaesen game and a One Ring Adventure. We have Cubicle 7, Hit Point Press, and Modiphius with nominations for that. For Best RPG Game Core Product, we have Avatar Legends, Marvel Multiverse, Star Trek Adventures Captain's Log, Devil's Dandy Dogs, and Die, the role-playing game. You can see all of the nominations at the link in our show notes, or go to originsgamefair.com.